The last bus rattled, its arrival a lonely echo in the deserted street. A lone figure clutching a worn suitcase hurried towards it. Rain, cold and insistent, plastered his coat to his back. He shivered, pulling his collar high, seeking solace from the biting wind. The bus, its windows dark, seemed to materialize from the fog, a metal phantom in the night. He reached the bus, his breath misting in the cold air. The doors hissed open, releasing a gust of stale, warm air that smelled faintly of gasoline and something else, something he couldn't quite place. He hesitated for a moment, a flicker of unease dancing at the edge of his mind. But the rain was relentless, and the promise of shelter, however dubious, beckoned. He climbed aboard, his shoes squeaking on the worn rubber floor. The bus was nearly empty, only a handful of shadowy figures huddled in the dim interior. They paid him no mind, their faces obscured by darkness or turned towards the windows, their gazes fixed on the desolate cityscape scrolling by. He moved past them, choosing a seat near the front, away from the oppressive silence that seemed to emanate from the other passengers. The bus lurched back into motion, leaving the relative warmth of the bus stop behind. As it pulled away, the man cast one last glance at the receding lights of the city, a pang of regret tugging at him. He was leaving behind the familiar, the comforting, and venturing into the unknown. And in the pit of his stomach, a cold knot of apprehension began to tighten.
The driver, a gaunt figure with a face etched with shadows, barely acknowledged his presence. His eyes, hollow and dark, seemed to bore into the man, seeing not just him but something beyond, something unsettling.
He quickly looked away, choosing instead to focus on the rain-streaked windows, on the reflection of his own worried face staring back at him. The engine rumbled, a low growl that vibrated through the floor and up his legs. He felt a strange sense of disorientation, as if the bus itself were a living thing, carrying him inexorably towards an unknown destination. He tried to recall why he was on this bus, where he was going, but the memory eluded him, lost in a haze of fatigue and growing unease. He shifted in his seat, the vinyl squeaking beneath him. The other passengers remained motionless, their silence amplifying the sense of isolation that enveloped him. He risked another glance at them, trying to discern their features in the dim light, but their faces remained hidden, their bodies swallowed by shadows. They were like phantoms, he thought, figments of his imagination conjured from the darkness and the relentless drumming of the rain. The bus rumbled on, its headlights cutting through the thickening fog that had descended upon the city. He watched as streetlights flickered past, casting an eerie glow on the deserted streets. The cityscape was giving way to darkened storefronts, abandoned buildings, and empty lots, the urban landscape dissolving into something desolate and unfamiliar. A soft whisper, barely audible above the drone of the engine, reached his ears. He turned his head, trying to identify the source, but the other passengers remained still, their faces hidden. He dismissed it as a trick of his imagination, the product of fatigue and the oppressive atmosphere of the bus. But then he heard it again, a sibilant murmur like dry leaves rustling in the wind. It seemed to come from behind him, a chorus of whispers that sent shivers down his spine. He strained to make out the words, but they remained elusive, a jumble of sounds that hinted at something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Fear, cold and clammy, tightened its grip on him. He wanted to get off the bus, to escape the suffocating atmosphere and the whispers that seemed to coil around him like phantom fingers. But the bus was relentless in its forward momentum, carrying him further and further away from the familiar, the safe, and deeper into the unknown. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving their way into his thoughts, his anxieties. He pressed his hands against his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The whispers were inside his head now, a chorus of disembodied voices whispering his name, murmuring of shadows and darkness, of things unseen and best left undisturbed.
The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving their way into his thoughts, his anxieties.
He pressed his hands against his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use.
The whispers were inside his head now, a chorus of disembodied voices whispering his name, murmuring of shadows and darkness, of things unseen and best left undisturbed.
Section 4, Unfamiliar Roads.
The city had vanished completely now, replaced by an endless expanse of darkness. The bus was speeding down unfamiliar roads, the headlights illuminating only fleeting glimpses of deserted fields and skeletal trees that clawed at the night sky. He felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to escape the confines of the bus, to be free of the whispers and the suffocating darkness. He stumbled to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. The bus lurched violently, throwing him off balance. He grabbed hold of a nearby seat, his knuckles white with exertion. The other passengers remained oblivious, their forms unmoving, their faces still hidden in the shadows.
"Let me off,"
he croaked, his voice hoarse and thin. He stumbled toward the front of the bus, his hand outstretched towards the driver. But the driver remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel with an unnatural stillness. The bus showed no signs of slowing. If anything, it seemed to be accelerating, hurtling through the darkness like a runaway train. He pounded on the glass partition that separated him from the driver, a desperate plea for acknowledgement, for help. But the driver didn't react, his gaze unwavering, his face a mask of eerie serenity.
Section 5. A terminal in the fog.
The bus shuddered to a halt, the engine sputtering and dying. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by the sound of the man's ragged breathing. He looked around, his heart pounding in his chest. They were in a vast empty lot, the only light emanating from the flickering neon sign of a dilapidated building that loomed before them. He stumbled off the bus, his legs shaky beneath him. The air was thick with fog, a cold, damp blanket that clung to him, stealing his breath. He looked back at the bus, but it was already receding into the fog, its outline blurring, its windows dark and vacant. He was alone. He turned towards the building, drawn by the faint glow of the neon sign. As he approached, he could make out the words barely visible through the fog. Terminal. A sense of foreboding washed over him, cold and suffocating. This was not a place he wanted to be, not a place he recognized. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door handle. He could hear the whispers again, fainter now, but still present, urging him forward, beckoning him into the unknown. He pushed the door open, a low groan echoing through the silence. The interior was dimly lit, the air stale and thick with the smell of dust and decay. A lone figure sat hunched over a desk in the corner, their features obscured by the shadows.
"Excuse me, can you tell me where I am?"
The figure didn't move, didn't even acknowledge his presence. He took a step closer, his unease growing with every passing second. As he rounded the corner, his blood ran cold. The figure behind the desk was skeletal, its clothes hanging loosely on its emaciated frame. Its head was bowed, its face hidden from view. But as he watched in horror, it slowly raised its head, revealing a skull-like visage, its eye sockets dark and empty. A sign on the desk, barely visible in the dim light, read, "Welcome to the end." The man stumbled back, a scream rising in his throat. He turned and ran, fleeing the terminal, the fog, the whispers, the skeletal figure with its hollow eyes and its message of despair. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away, had to escape the nightmare that had ensnared him. But the fog was everywhere, closing in around him, suffocating him, and the whispers, they were louder now, closer, mocking his fear, his desperation. He was trapped, lost in a labyrinth of fog and shadows, his only companions the whispers that promised oblivion.